You were taught to fear something you have never seen, never experienced, never encountered any direct evidence of, and yet the fear was real, completely real, real enough to shape decisions, real enough to govern behavior, real enough to visit you in the night when you were a child and leave something behind that did not fully go away when you grew up. Hell, eternal suffering. Punishment without end for choices made in a life that lasts, at most, a few decades. This is one of the most consequential ideas in the history of Western civilization, not because it is true, but because it has been believed by billions of people over 2,000 years, and because what people genuinely believe about the ultimate consequences of their choices shapes everything about how they live, what they risk, what they sacrifice, who they trust, what they think they deserve. Baruch Spinoza looked at this doctrine with the same philosophical honesty he brought to everything else, the same honesty that got his books burned across Europe, the same honesty that cost him his community and his safety and eventually his health. And what he found was not the comfortable atheist dismissal that says hell is obviously false because God is obviously false. He found something more precise, more philosophically devastating, and more personally relevant to anyone who has ever carried this particular fear. He found that hell is not just probably false. It is logically impossible. In any universe governed by a God worthy of the name, not because God is too kind to permit suffering, but because the structure of reality as Spinoza understands it makes eternal punishment a philosophical contradiction. And he found something else, something that most people who reject the doctrine of hell miss entirely, that the fear itself, the specific emotional experience of fearing eternal punishment, is one of the most destructive forces that can operate in a human life. Not because fear is always bad, but because this particular fear is uniquely designed to prevent exactly the kind of understanding that Spinoza believes is the only genuine path to human flourishing. By the end of this exploration, you will understand not just why Spinoza rejects hell philosophically. You will understand what carried that fear in your own life, and what becomes possible when it is no longer there. Let us begin with the philosophical argument, because it is more rigorous than most people expect. And the rigor matters. Hell, as the Western Christian tradition has developed it, requires several things to be true simultaneously. Each of them, Spinoza argues, is incompatible with a coherent understanding of God. First, hell requires that God is a being who desires things. Specifically, that God desires obedience and is genuinely displeased by disobedience. That God has preferences about human behavior and experiences something like anger or disappointment when those preferences are violated. But a God who desires things is a God who lacks something. A God who lacks something is finite, not infinite. And a finite God is not God in any meaningful philosophical sense. The infinite substance that Spinoza calls God or nature does not desire anything, does not lack anything, does not experience disappointment or anger. It simply is what it necessarily is, expressing itself in every mode of existence without preference and without judgment. This is not a comfortable conclusion for the institution, because a God who does not desire obedience cannot be threatened with displeasure, cannot be appeased with ritual, cannot authorize any institution to speak in his name and manage access to his favor. A God without preferences has no favorites, and an institution that claims to represent the preferences of such a God is claiming something that does not exist. Second, hell requires that punishment serves a purpose. In human justice, punishment serves several purposes. It deters future bad behavior. It rehabilitates the person who did wrong. It protects society from ongoing harm. It expresses the community's values about what matters. Eternal punishment serves none of these purposes. It cannot deter future bad behavior because the person being punished has no future in which to behave differently. It cannot rehabilitate because rehabilitation implies eventual release into a life where the change matters. It cannot protect society because society is not threatened by someone already dead. And it cannot express communal values in any proportionate way, because no finite action, however wrong, is proportionate to infinite suffering. The only function that eternal punishment could serve is pure retribution. Suffering for the sake of suffering, pain as its own end. And Spinoza finds it impossible to reconcile this with any coherent account of what God is. A God who inflicts infinite suffering as an end in itself is not more moral than the humans who commit crimes in his name. It is less moral. Third, and most fundamentally, hell requires that human beings have a kind of freedom that Spinoza's philosophy denies they have. The kind of freedom that would make eternal punishment just. The freedom of a being who, fully informed, fully rational, with complete understanding of the consequences, deliberately chooses evil for its own sake. Spinoza does not believe any human being has ever exercised this kind of freedom, not because human beings are not responsible for their actions, but because every human action, including the most harmful ones, flows from a combination of inadequate understanding, passive emotions that overwhelm reason, and circumstances that the person did not fully choose. No one chooses evil with full understanding of what they are choosing. If they genuinely understood, they would not choose it, because evil genuinely understood is always also self-destructive, and no being with adequate understanding of reality chooses to destroy itself. This does not mean harmful actions have no consequences. It means the consequences flow naturally from the actions themselves, rather than from an external judgment imposed by a God who decided to punish. Now here is what I want you to sit with before we continue. Think about a decision you made in your life that was shaped by the fear of hell. Not a decision you made because you understood it was right. A decision you made because you were afraid of the consequences of the alternative. Afraid in the specific way that fear of eternal suffering produces. Write in the comments. Did the fear of hell ever shape a real decision in your life? Yes or no? You do not have to say what the decision was. Just the fact of whether the fear was real enough to change something. Because what Spinoza says about that fear is not just philosophically interesting. It is personally relevant to anyone who answers yes. Now let us talk about what the fear of hell actually does to a human being. Because this is where Spinoza's analysis becomes most practically important. Fear, in Spinoza's philosophy, is a passive emotion. It diminishes your power rather than increasing it. It narrows your perspective rather than expanding it. It makes you less capable of genuine understanding and less capable of effective action. But the fear of hell is not ordinary fear. It is a very specific kind of fear that has several features that make it particularly destructive. First, it is infinite in scope. Ordinary fears are finite. The fear of losing your job, the fear of a difficult conversation, the fear of physical pain. These fears are real, but they are bounded. They attach to specific possible outcomes of limited duration. The fear of hell is attached to an outcome of literally infinite duration, infinite suffering, forever. And the human mind cannot genuinely process infinity. What it produces instead is a diffuse, generalized anxiety that has no natural resolution, no point at which the feared outcome has been successfully avoided and the fear can release. Second, it is attached to actions and states that are defined by the institution rather than by the person's own understanding. What sends a person to hell is not determined by the person's own honest moral evaluation of their actions. It is determined by doctrinal categories that the institution controls: missing Mass, dying without sacraments, holding incorrect beliefs, belonging to the wrong tradition. These are not categories that emerge from genuine moral understanding. They are categories that require institutional authority to define and institutional membership to navigate. This means that a person who fears hell is dependent on the institution not just for comfort but for information about what they should fear. The institution defines the danger. The institution offers the protection. And the person who fears the danger has no way to evaluate either the danger or the protection independently, because both are defined by the same authority whose credibility cannot be questioned without risking the danger. Third, and most destructively for Spinoza, the fear of hell is specifically designed to suppress the kind of honest inquiry that could resolve it. If you genuinely question whether hell exists, you risk hell for questioning. The very act of honest intellectual engagement with the doctrine is framed as dangerous. Faith, in this context, does not mean trust based on evidence and experience. It means the suspension of honest inquiry as a condition of safety. This is what Spinoza finds most devastating about the doctrine. Not that it is false, but that it is specifically constructed to prevent the honest engagement with reality that he believes is the only path to genuine human flourishing. It does not just produce fear. It produces a fear that cannot be examined without triggering more fear. A closed system of anxiety that serves the institution perfectly and serves the person carrying it not at all. And if this channel is where you want to continue this kind of examination, subscribe now. Because Spinoza spent his life arguing that honest inquiry is not the enemy of genuine spirituality. It is its only reliable foundation. Now, let us talk about what Spinoza says actually happens after death. Because rejecting hell is not the same as rejecting the question that hell was supposed to answer. The question of what happens to consciousness when the body dies is real, and Spinoza has a real answer. His answer is not heaven, and it is not nothing. It is something that requires understanding his broader philosophy to fully appreciate. Spinoza argues that the human mind is the idea of the human body, not a separate soul that inhabits the body temporarily and departs at death, but the mental aspect of the same physical reality that the body is the physical aspect of. Mind and body are not two things. They are one thing, the specific mode of infinite substance that you are, seen from two different angles. When the body dies, the specific configuration of matter that was this person dissolves back into the infinite substance from which it emerged, and the specific configuration of consciousness that was this person's mind dissolves with it. There is no individual soul that persists unchanged through death and arrives at a destination of reward or punishment. But Spinoza does not conclude from this that nothing survives death. He makes a more subtle and more philosophically interesting argument. He says that insofar as the human mind understands things adequately, under the aspect of eternity, that understanding participates in something that is not subject to the limitations of a particular body in a particular time. The adequate understanding of a mathematical truth, for example, is not located in any particular body. It is not yours or mine. It is the truth itself, which is eternal, and the mind that grasps it participates, in that moment of grasping, in something that transcends the individual. The more a person develops genuine understanding during their lifetime, the more their mind participates in something that is not bounded by the individual life, not as a reward for good behavior, as a natural consequence of what genuine understanding is. Understanding is participation in the eternal structure of reality, and that participation is real regardless of what happens to the body that housed the mind that achieved it. This is not the heaven of the tradition. There is no individual consciousness that persists and experiences reward. There is no recognition, no reunion with loved ones, no continued personal existence. Spinoza does not offer the consolation of personal immortality. What he offers instead is something more philosophically honest, the recognition that the individual life, fully lived and genuinely understood, participates in something larger than itself. Not because God rewards it, because that is what genuine understanding does. It connects the finite to the infinite, the particular to the universal, the temporary to the eternal. And it does so not at death, but during life. Every moment of genuine understanding is already a participation in eternity. Every act of genuine love is already a participation in what Spinoza calls the intellectual love of God. Death does not add to this or take away from it. It simply ends the specific configuration that was doing the understanding and the loving. What the understanding and the loving participated in was always larger than the configuration, and remains so. Now let us talk about what genuine love of God looks like when the fear of hell is removed. Because this is where the practical significance of Spinoza's position becomes most clear. A person who loves God because they fear hell does not love God. They fear hell. The object of their emotional life is the punishment, not the divine. And organizing your spiritual life around avoiding punishment produces a very specific kind of person. One whose relationship to what is sacred is fundamentally transactional. I perform the required behaviors. The institution confirms my compliance. The punishment is deferred. This is not love. Spinoza is clear about this. Love, genuinely understood, is joy accompanied by the idea of an external cause. It is the increase of your power and capacity in the presence of something. It is not the relief of a threat being temporarily held at bay. The person who genuinely loves God in Spinoza's sense loves the infinite reality that underlies everything, loves it not because they fear the consequences of not loving it, but because genuinely understanding it produces joy. The same joy that Einstein felt in his equations, the same joy that the mystics described as the dissolution of the boundary between self and infinite, the same joy that you have felt, however briefly, in those moments when reality showed you something of its depth. That love does not require hell to motivate it. It requires only genuine understanding to produce it. And genuine understanding is available to any human being willing to pursue it honestly, without institutional mediation, without the management of fear, without the transactional relationship between compliance and safety. The fear of hell is the replacement for that love, offered to people who have not been helped to develop genuine understanding, as a motivator for behavior that genuine understanding would motivate naturally. It is not a supplement to love of God. It is a substitute for it, and a poor one, because fear and love cannot coexist in the same relationship. Where fear governs, love recedes. And where love is genuine, fear of punishment becomes irrelevant. Think about the people you know who seem most genuinely at peace with questions of God and meaning and death. Not the ones who have suppressed the questions. Not the ones performing confidence they do not feel, but the ones who seem to have genuinely found something solid to stand on. Is their peace based on the assurance that they have correctly completed the requirements for avoiding hell? Or is it based on something that feels more like genuine understanding, more like the kind of relationship with what is real that does not require the fear of what might come after to sustain it? Spinoza would say that the second kind of peace is the only kind that is real. because it does not depend on the institution's confirmation that you have qualified for safety. It depends on your own growing understanding of what is actually there. And that understanding, once genuinely achieved, cannot be taken away by any institutional authority, cannot be threatened by any doctrine of punishment, cannot be undermined by any fear. The mantra that captures what Spinoza found when he read the doctrine of hell honestly: I will not be governed by what I fear. I will be guided by what I understand. Write it in the comments, or write your answer to the question this video asked at the beginning. Did the fear of hell ever shape a real decision in your life? Yes or no? And if you want to say more, say it. This community was built for exactly that conversation. And right where you are watching from, your country, one word, because this fear has been carried in every country, in every language, by every person who was taught that the ultimate consequence of wrong choice was not just loss but infinite suffering, and the conversation about what that fear did to people and what becomes possible without it is worth having openly. The next exploration is waiting for you on screen right now. Spinoza did not remove the fear of hell to make life easier. He removed it because it was standing between human beings and the genuine understanding that he believed was the only real foundation for a good life. Not the performance of compliance. The actual development of wisdom. That development is available to you. It has always been available to you. It does not require that you first be freed from hell. It requires only that you begin to understand what you actually are, and what the reality you inhabit actually is. Honestly, without the distortion that fear produces. Start now. Now let us talk about what the fear of hell actually does to a human being over a lifetime, because this is where the analysis becomes most personally relevant. Consider what it means to carry a fear that has no natural resolution. Ordinary fears resolve. You feared the difficult conversation and you had it and it was fine. You feared losing your job and found another. Fear, when the feared outcome either happens or is successfully avoided, releases. The fear of hell does not release, because the feared outcome is infinitely deferred. It will happen, if it happens, after death, which means there is no point in a living person's life when they can confirm that the fear was unnecessary. The fear is always potentially valid, always potentially pointing at something real, and so it never fully releases. It becomes a permanent background condition of the inner life. This is not accidental. A fear that never releases keeps the person in a permanent state of dependency on whatever institution manages the threat. The church that can confirm your compliance. The priest who can absolve your failures. The doctrine that defines what counts as safe and what counts as dangerous. Spinoza is not saying that the people who constructed this system were consciously cynical. He is saying that systems evolve toward what sustains them. And a system built on managing existential fear sustains itself by keeping the fear alive, not necessarily through malice, through the structural logic of what institutions need to survive. What he is saying is that the person carrying the fear pays the price for that structural logic with their inner life, with the quality of attention they can bring to the present moment, with the genuineness of the love they can feel for what is actually there, with the honesty of the inquiry they can pursue into the questions that matter most. All of these are compromised by a fear that is always potentially valid and never fully resolved. And here is something worth saying honestly before we continue. Spinoza's rejection of hell does not mean the rejection of moral seriousness. The absence of eternal punishment does not mean the absence of consequences. Actions that cause harm produce real damage in real lives. That damage is not canceled by the absence of a divine judge. It remains. And a person who genuinely understands this, who sees clearly what their actions produce in the people around them, has more reason to act well than someone motivated primarily by fear of punishment, because the understanding is always present. The fear only operates when the threat feels real. Spinoza is also not claiming certainty about what happens after death. His account of the mind as the idea of the body, and of the partial eternity of adequate understanding, is a philosophical argument, a rigorous one, but not a description based on direct knowledge of what death involves. Nobody has that, and anyone who claims otherwise, in either direction, is claiming more than the evidence supports. What Spinoza claims is more modest and more defensible, that the specific doctrine of eternal punishment for finite choices is philosophically incoherent, and that the fear it produces does more damage to human flourishing than any good it might motivate could justify. That is a claim that can be evaluated against the philosophical arguments, against your own experience of what that fear has done in your life, against the evidence of what people who carry it and people who have released it actually become. That evaluation is yours to make, not the institution's, not Spinoza's, yours. The mantra that captures what Spinoza found when he looked at the doctrine of hell honestly. I will not be governed by what I fear. I will be guided by what I understand. Write it in the comments. Or write your answer to the question this video asked at the beginning: did the fear of hell ever shape a real decision in your life? Yes or no? And if you want to say more, say it. This community was built for exactly that conversation. And write where you are watching from. One word. Because this fear has been carried in every country and every language, by every person, taught that wrong choice leads not just to loss, but to infinite suffering. The next exploration is waiting for you on screen right now. Spinoza did not remove the fear of hell to make life easier. He argued against it because he believed it was standing between human beings and the honest understanding of reality that he considered the only genuine foundation for a good life. Whether he was right is something only honest examination can determine. Not inherited assumption. Yours. And one more thing before this exploration ends. There are people who will watch this video and feel relief. People who have carried the fear of hell for decades and who find in Spinoza's argument permission to set it down. That relief is real, and I do not want to dismiss it. But relief is not the same as understanding, and Spinoza would want that distinction made clearly. If you set down the fear of hell simply because a philosopher told you it was philosophically incoherent, you have replaced one form of deference to authority with another. You believed the institution because it claimed authority. Now you believe Spinoza because he claims rigor. The structure is the same. Only the authority has changed. What Spinoza actually invites is something more demanding than relief. He invites you to work through the philosophical arguments yourself, to evaluate whether a God who desires obedience is genuinely coherent, to consider whether eternal punishment serves any purpose that genuine justice requires, to examine your own experience of what the fear produced in your life and what honest inquiry produces instead. If you do that work and arrive at a conclusion different from Spinoza's, he would consider that more valuable than agreement arrived at through deference. Because the work itself, the honest engagement with the questions that matter most, is what he believed human beings were built for, and what the fear of hell, specifically and systematically, prevented. Start the work, not because Spinoza says to, because the questions are real, and they deserve real answers, arrived at through honest inquiry rather than managed fear. There is also something worth acknowledging directly to the person watching this who still believes in hell. Spinoza's argument is a philosophical challenge to the doctrine. It is not a dismissal of the moral seriousness that the doctrine was trying to address. The reality of human evil, the reality that some actions cause devastating harm and that the people who commit them sometimes show no remorse, is not cancelled by Spinoza's rejection of eternal punishment. He takes that reality seriously. More seriously, he would argue, than a doctrine that outsources its resolution to an afterlife judgment, rather than addressing it through genuine understanding in this one. And the question of what happens after death is genuinely open. Spinoza's account is philosophically coherent. It is not the only coherent account. Serious thinkers have defended versions of personal immortality that do not require the logical problems he identifies in the hell doctrine. The honest position is that nobody knows with certainty, and a philosophy built on honesty has to say that. What Spinoza is certain about is narrower and more defensible. That the specific fear of infinite punishment for finite choices has produced enormous damage in human lives across 2,000 years of Western history, and that whatever genuine moral seriousness the doctrine was trying to capture could be better captured without it. Whether he is right is something only honest examination can determine. If you know someone who has carried this specific fear, share this video with them, not as a verdict on what they should believe, but as an invitation to examine whether the fear is serving them or costing them more than it gives. Because that examination, done honestly, is itself the thing Spinoza believed human beings were most capable of and most denied access to by the institutions that manage their inner lives through fear. The next exploration is waiting for you on screen right now. Start now.